Good day. Welcome back. So now I am beginning my series on blunders in the World Chess Champion Candidates tournaments. Wrapped up the World Chess Championship itself, and now we're going back to the first candidates event in 1950, which is when the first sort of official candidates happened. 1948 was a match tournament for the World Chess Championship, but you've obviously had strong tournaments before which had that feel of being a selector for the challenger for a World Chess Championship. Maybe you'd say 1946 or Avro tournaments and so on. But this is after sort of FIDE's got the ball rolling, and you have interzonals and then a candidates tournament, and the winner of that meets the World Chess Champion, who at this moment is Botflick. Okay, cool. So this is just sort of the background. We're going to sort of do something similar I did with the World Chess Championships. It's been a bit more analysis required because obviously with most of these tournaments you get about 100 games. There's quite a few more blunders, and I came up with 20 blunders in this, but I filtered them down to the ones which either I found interesting because it was interesting tactic, or particularly an endgame blunder, and also those ones which maybe you'd say have some impact on the result of the tournament. Okay, so let's just have a look at this one. We have the interzonal tournament, and go down to sort of at the bottom, but you can see Bronstein, Boleslavsky-Kotov, Lilienthal, Najdorf, Stahlberg, and Flohr all qualified. You can see actually it wasn't supposed to be so many, because go back to the interzonal tournament. What happened is that you had Reshevsky, Fine, and Irv, who played in 48, didn't participate, so 3 extra spots were given for the candidates. So that's why so many came through. And then you look at the candidates tournament itself, spoiler alert, Bronstein won it, sort of equal with Boleslavsky at the end of the tournament. And then they had a tiebreak match, which Bronstein won. So I'm going to cover a couple of blunders in that as well. So that's where I mean, you can read more here on the Wikipedia page at your leisure, but obviously that's sort of the setup here. We have interzonals, which we're not going to cover, candidates, and which we're all looking at, and then World Chess Championships we've already looked at. Okay, let me minimize that. And then I'm going to try and do the same sort of thing as before. I've got game chart. Here's the first blunder we're going to look at, Stahlberg-Keres in round 1, and you can see there's a blunder there by Stahlberg. And before we start, though, I want to just give a flavour of what happened in the tournament. You can see actually the result is already there, which you can have a look at if you like. This is sort of the rolling scores over the 18 rounds, because it's 10 players play each of the other 9 opponents twice. And green is leading the tournament. So Bronstein, Boleslavsky, and Keres were the early advances in the tournament. And then you ended up with Boleslavsky leading, and then he kind of stumbled and stayed at 6, and then Bronstein was second for a while, caught up to him in the last 2 rounds, winning both those games, and Keres just fell away. So that gives you a sense of how the tournament ran. And in fact, we can also see that as a chart, which will just show, this is what I'll sort of have a quick look at every time we look at one of these candidates. Okay, there's the chart, and basically describe what I said. So orange, Boleslavsky up the top. Bronstein is blue color. He wasn't doing very well, and he caught up. Smyslov green, he came third in the end, didn't do well at the start. And Keres red did well and fell away a little bit. And what we're going to sort of look at a little bit is you got a few of these blunders, like Bronstein-Keres, the last round definitely had an impact on the tournament. Boleslavsky-Kotov had helped Kotov get in the lead. You can see how I've labeled all these different sort of blunders. And if we look back here, get an idea of blunders by player. Smyslov and Flohr, Kotov all made 3. Actually, Kotov was supposed to be better than 22 in Stahlberg-Lilienthal, Keres, and then gifts for players. And you can see that Bronstein got a couple of blunders in his favour, but Boleslavsky got 1. So I think the general situation here is definitely that last blunder by Keres certainly helped Bronstein. Bronstein maybe got as a whole. And so what we're going to look at is, I'll list them out later. I've got a big list here, but I've got a bunch of games I've picked. We'll look at the position. You can try and solve the position, and then we'll go into what's going on. Okay, great. Let's get started. Okay, so here's the setup screen. It's a little bit out of whack. Not sure what happened. Anyway, we'll proceed. I'll fix that later. Now, what I'm going to try and do to get a sense of the way the tournament went is focus on some of these games involving Boleslavsky, Bronstein, Smyslov, and Keres. Because if you ever look through the tournament, you can see Keres got off to a nice start here. Here's a blunder by Bronstein, benefited. And then Boleslavsky-Kotov That was a extra point for Boleslavsky at that point. Bronstein-Keres, we'll definitely look at that the last game, which allowed Bronstein to catch up. And you can see another few games here with Smyslov and Keres involved. So we'll sort of go through a few of those as the tournament proceeds. You can see the general layout here on the screen. So that's the rolling scores. And then here's the first game we're going to look at from round one. It's this Keres-Stahlberg game. And you can see the idea is the green dot. Keres got a point. Stahlberg lost. He's in red. And you can see the game actually, it sort of was drawn, and then Stahlberg made a blunder. And this one I find particularly interesting, as I always do, is endgame, rook endgame. Look at that position. It is a draw. However, that being said, white a pawn down. He has to be quite accurate here because of the poor position of his king. So let's just quickly go through the game continuation. We'll go back later and have a look at what the drawing line should have been. So if we proceed, rook to b2. And now here's the choice which white makes. He should grab the g-pawn. And that draws. Rook e7 also draws, which is attacking the g-pawn. But what he did do was a mistake. Now, kind of strange why this is a mistake. So rook e2 is now played. So black's able to hold both his queenside pawns at this stage. And the other problem is the very poor position of the white king, which gives black time to reorganize. For instance, let's have a look at white's next move. We're following the game continuation here. He played rook f8. Let's try, for instance, say he grabs the pawn now. And this is why you see white's in a bit of trouble here. Rook e4. And then now the best move is rook c7, checking over the rook, because, have a look, there's a very nasty mating net there. So basically, maybe that's what Stahlberg overlooked. Rook f8 played in the game, but it's still lost. Black can now attack the pawns from the side. White effectively lost his chance to pick up the black pawn. Saves one pawn, loses the other one. Check. Black saves most his pawns on the king side. Having the king trapped on the queen side is the big problem. And you can see this is a winning position now. White resigned. King cut off on the back rank. And we've got 2 pawns. Okay, so let's go way back to position. Right. Okay, so he saved his pawn and he was lost. Part of it was the poor position of the white king as a tactic. Right, so let's go for the grab pawn right route, which is the drawing line. We take the g pawn. Black takes the h pawn. Now we have time to attack the e pawn. E pawn drops. You can see it's most likely to be a draw. So king g6 is one way to hold it. And this position, it's just 2 pawns versus 2 pawns. Yeah. The white king will make its way back. That's a draw. Black's actually lost all his pawns. That line. Try another line. Rook e7. Takes the pawn. Even lost a tempo, and it's still a draw. King comes back. And you see this final position here that just the computer suggests repeating with check. What else are you going to do? The b pawn's lost. If you lose the b pawn, then it's 2 versus 2. King side, and will be a draw. So back to this original position here. Just unfortunate. Maybe if it wasn't for that checkmating pattern on the queen side, maybe h3 would have still been a draw. But because of the tactics around it, basically white had to take that pawn. We'll take a pawn. And various things happen. I mean, what else could we try here? We could check the king is another potential line. King just comes back. Check the king. King comes back. And basically, this is holdable. I think one good thing to point out is in this position, white's got 2 connected pawns, and black pawns are exposed. So one of those drops fairly easily, and back to 2 versus 2. Okay, so that's the first blunder we looked at, and that is where Keres got a benefit from that end game blunder by Stahlberg. So let's move on to the next game. Let me get it set up. Okay, I'm including this next game. Doesn't really have an impact on the tournament. Stahlberg Flohr. They were 2 of the less successful players in this tournament. And this is from round 5. But I just thought it's a double blunder. You look at the chart here. Stahlberg blundered, then Flohr blundered. Let's have a look Just a very simple tactic, which is why I thought it was funny. So there's the move by white, which was knight to b6. And have a look at this position. There's a winning move. Flohr did not play it. Okay, so Flohr played knight to d6 and the game moved on. But actually the winning move to d8. And if you look at this funny position here is undefended rook, bishop, defended once, rook attacks, knight attacks, and there's actually nothing to be done. You know, you might think, okay, well, let's just grab this bishop. Because obviously there's no other move that makes any sense. Because you can see all the pieces hanging. And maybe it's not as simple as so. We took the knight. Maybe this is the move which black missed. Move our king, of all things. There's a few moves to consider here. So at the moment, the position is still kind of even, right? Sometimes we take the knight with the bishop, take back. So we're a piece down, but we're still threatening this piece twice. So we retrieve our knight. Now we take the bishop off and got to watch out for this check. So we got to lose a move here. Move your rook somewhere to d4, rook to d4, to a4. And you see at the end of it all, we've ended up 2 pawns to the good, and it's -5 according to the computer. It's one way the game could proceed. Go back to the other choices here. In knight takes, king f7. What else can we do here? We just tried taking the knight off with check. The other logical thing to do is retreat our knight. Creation. Let's see what happens now. We take the piece off. Once again, we're threatening a check, so I'm going to do something. Computer's actually saying bd5. Let's try something else. Rook c1. Then king f6. And I think basically the point here is that we've ended a couple of pawns up. We go back to knight b6. Knight b6 was played, and bishop a2. And the bishop pair and the pins and the bishop under attack actually peters out to a draw. That's quite funny, actually. Sort of a +3 double swing in that position. Okay, so let me move on to the. That was just a bit of fun, that one. Although it was a bit more complicated than maybe the first sight. And let's now move on to the next game. Okay, we've moved along to round 8. So this is this game right here. So Boleslavsky got a benefit of a blunder by Kotov. It's obviously pretty important for the tournament. And you see the position there. White has a bit of an edge, but continuation recommended is rook takes b7. Let's have a look what the computer suggests should happen. Do that line first. Rook takes b7. Really bad. Take back with the knight. Now we can move our knight out of the way. She's saying f8 is better. That's fine. And what's the count here? White number of pawns, 4 each. So this should obviously kind of peter out to a draw. Continuation given by the engine. Not much to do there. I mean, it's still quite complicated, but obviously the fact that these pawns are doubled, they're quite dangerous, but they're doubled, so it can be kept well under control by the black pieces. Okay, so let's have a look what happened in the game. So you see, black took the knight off, so white is temporarily pieced down, but a game continuation would take the knight, right? And we're threatening the queen, so you cannot take white's rook. So rook d8, let's block the pawn. But now c5 check. This is not nice, is it? King g6, rook to b6 check. King takes the pawn off. Okay, I think that's okay. But now what happens is that we're going to transpose into a winning endgame. King c8 is actually given as the best move, but then that just drops the bishop. So let's do what was played. Keep our bishop on the board. Check. Take off the rooks. Threaten to advance our pawn, and that's where the game ended. Because realistically speaking, black can't stop that. If we go there, for instance, we'll take off the a pawn, and now we've got this pawn here, which maybe ordinarily would be okay, but it's going to cost black his bishop. There's no way of stopping it being pushed, and obviously we're covering the queen square and we're threatening a check, so next logical move would be to grab it, take it off, and this is obviously a win, right? So basically that tactic here, rook's coming off, this is a winning bishop endgame, which Kotov fell into, and Boleslavsky got his bonus half a point from that continuation. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. Okay, so we've moved along to Smyslov-Lilienthal in round 10. It's this game here. And you can see that, Smyslov's still in the running. So that's why, you got Keres and Boleslavsky ahead of him, and he's at the same level Bronstein at this point. So he's still like, actually, he win this game by by a blunder by Lilienthal, but it's actually really, really interesting. You look at this position, it should be drawn, right? Now, this could actually be a whole video on its own. If all the pawns are exchanged off, then it's a theoretical draw. So black just needs to have a way of getting rid of his 2 pawns for white's 1 pawn. So it's interesting zone, right? Now, if you look at this position, it's only one drawing move, which is rook h5. Let's have a look at that in a sec. Let's see what happened in the game. So h5 was played. So let's see how white wins from this position. First of all, we give a check, which is the correct move. The king, well, you can see the score. It's all these ups and downs here. King h3 was played. King f5 was a little bit better, but let's just see what happens with king h3. We're really embarrassing the black king now. Doesn't look good. Okay, get the rook out of the way, attacking the knight. Threatening checkmate. Check. Still threatening checkmate. Got to hold the pawn. Push our pawns pinned. Probably the best continuation. And then now that square is covered. This check is nasty. So, the line gives here is rook c2, knight f2, check, rook takes f2, check, king takes f2, king takes d4. So that will be winning. Right, so let's go back to, let's just look at another line here. King to h3 was not good. King to f5 is better. So this wasn't played, but it's also another losing continuation. So how might white maneuver here? Rook to d2, rook to g2, put pressure on the white pawn, which can't lose it. So put the knight here. Makes it very difficult to exchange off pawn. A2, b2 doesn't really matter. Let's give a check. King gets pushed back. Rook h7, and it's just difficult that at some point one pawn will drop, then the other pawn will drop. So that would have been a much more laborious way for Smyslov to win than what happened in the game. Okay, so we get right back to this position where h5 was played. Let's do the drawing line and see how that works. This is just interesting in your own games. Maybe this is something you can look for. Okay, so let's go through. Just put a computer line up here. Check. Lock. Okay. So this is just one of those ways. So obviously it's a fairly edge case here. How does black get rid of white's pawn? Okay, and you can see how it works. h4. Okay, can't take it obviously. So we can give a check or we can push. But let's say g4 is played. That pawn will advance. This is really neat actually. And that was check. Had to move back. The knight blocks the h pawn. And the problem here is that it actually ends up with corresponding squares because at some point, if the king goes back to pick up the pawn, then that gives us the opportunity to advance our pawn and it gets swapped off. So you go back to this position here. We're guaranteed to be able to swap them all, right? What's another possibility? You can check, see how that goes. We stay behind the pawn. And then if we do the same thing, push the pawn like we did last time, e6, f4, h3, and you end up with the same position effectively. Right, so that's quite interesting. Black could go into this position, although it looks bad. He's got 2 pawns versus 1. White has a knight, but he's able to force one of the pawns to exchange for the white pawn, and that's a draw. Okay, I thought that was quite interesting, and had still because that Smyslov got a little bit of a boost, and he was still in the running. So let's move along to the next game. Okay, I think we're now moving on to games which you consider have some relevance. Now this is Bronstein versus Smyslov, 2 of the players who were given chances to win. Bronstein did win, and so this is in round 11. Down a little bit so we can see which round we're in. Round 11. It's Bronstein and Smyslov were even at this stage, so Smyslov's blunder put him behind, well behind. I mean, Smyslov's down here at this stage, so obviously he was looking to catch up to Bronstein. Didn't do so, and now he's 2 points behind Bronstein and 4 points behind Boleslavsky. No chance at all. Difficult to go back and think about or recreate the tension, but this is probably one of the key games for Bronstein in particular in his effort to catch up to Boleslavsky. So you can see on the game profile, you can see that actually black, Smyslov actually had a decent edge for quite a few moves there, and then blundered, and the game was over effectively. So let's have a look at what happened. We'll just go AC1. Not the best move, but it's okay. And then there was a blunder here. The king d8 is a blunder. Maybe have a quick look at it yourself and work out why king d8 is a blunder. Okay, so what we'll do is quickly go through the game continuation. So king d8 is played, c6 obviously, and then now maybe this is what Smyslov missed. He can't move the knight because c7 check would be absolutely deadly. So he played some other move. Yeah, knight f6, just the c7 check. So he moved his rook to b5. Looks good. Okay, so first of all, kick the queen away and then take the knight. So now he's recovered the piece and looks like a pretty bad position for, because his king's totally exposed. B and the C files are accessible to white's major pieces. Sort of a simple continuation. A pawn drops now, comes back, defends the bishop. You can sort of see that this pawn on the 7th rank is pretty bad. And white was just keeping the king side closed, and now he's getting his pawn, and that is win. Okay, so it's difficult to know exactly what Smyslov missed here, but the move which kept his edge was actually knight f6. So he takes d6 check. I mean, that's what you'd play, and don't take it, because queen c5 check would be rather nasty. So basically, you just got to stay back on the back rank, and then now just basically you've got a lot of pieces around the black king, and you're able to drive the queen back and some counterplay on the king side. So you're not necessarily going to win this, but you've got queen and a piece for 2 rooks, so that's sufficient to hold quality. Just goes into some sort of perpetual check type situation. Go back to this position here. King d8 was the blunder. It kind of looked like the right move to be playing, but because of that immediate tactic of losing a piece back straight away, that's why it wasn't the right move. Okay, so that's one of the important games in the outcome of the tournament. So let's move on to the next game we're going to look at. Okay, so we've moved on to round 12, and we're looking at Flohr versus Lilienthal. You can see that both these players towards the bottom of the tournament, so this is not important for the outcome of the game. The blunder we're going to look at, you can see it there, early move at 61, and a winning position by Flohr is thrown away. And what we might just do is have a look. I just found this an interesting loss of advantage position here. It looks pretty good for white. Computer thinks +3. Okay, knight to f5. All good, all good. And then what is wrong with bishop f5? Throws away the win. Have a think about it. What's the idea here? This is why the only reason I'm including this is really interesting. Okay, got to take back. And what you will see is this game continuation. Push the pawn. Check. Just getting rid of that pawn. And now we've got the perfect setup for a fortress. Carlson doesn't believe in fortresses, but this is definitely a fortress. So you've got 2 safe squares for the rook, which is important, although I guess one of them is going to be pushed away. But now, actually, that's also a safe square for the rook. Obviously, white tries for a little bit. King got a couple of squares, which is safe. And then, of course, if he ever pushes the pawn to h3, try that. Actually, you take it. You don't just sit, you lose if you sit. It's 2 squares, and the rook can hover backwards and forward, keeps the white king out, and white can do nothing. So that was, you think of that transition to a winning endgame. What happened there was a transition to a drawn fortress position. So Flohr obviously missed that when he whipped the knight off. Okay, that was just a quick interlude. Let's go back to the next game. Okay, so what we've got now is Najdorf-Bronstein, round 14. The eagle-eyed among you will realize that this is actually not showing up on my top chart because I think it's slightly less than a 300 blunder, but obviously it did determine the result of the game, so I've got to do some adjustments to the way I look at it. So you get back to that thing, well, maybe Bronstein definitely got the advantage from the blunders to get his chance to finish. Now you can see the bottom right chart there where Najdorf blundered about move 52, and there's a little blunder later, that doesn't matter, but this is the main blunder. A drawn game was then losing, and if you look at round 14, this is win by Bronstein, so he's catching up, keeping within 2 points, which is actually totally critical by the end. Najdorf's purpley color down sort of mid-rank, doesn't really do much good. Now, I like this. Once again, this is one of those absolutely critical rook endgames. So if we look at the position here, g4 was played by Najdorf. It looks pretty logical. Let's swap some pawns off and see how it goes. Let's see how it goes. It's actually a losing move. So g4 is played. You can see a couple of rook moves we'll look at later, which was the way to go. So black's winning move. Only one winning move. Snap off the d-pawn. You get the idea here that actually white's king's pretty bad position. It can be good for defensive purposes, but if black ends up with 2 pawns, then white's obviously in trouble. Takes. There was an alternative move there. Maybe we'll go back to. So we hold both pawns, and in fact, you can see the winning technique here is ties the rook down to the defense. So this rook being able to defend both sides is critical to this position. Now advance the pawn forwards, and it just repeat the process. Now stepped up the second pawn. Check, king, check, check, and I don't think white can do much here. Just checks him over there, and we go pick up that pawn. But have a look. This is just a very simple technique. The white king is too far away, and black has this perfect setup, and that's obviously a winning position because there's no way white can stop the promotion. In fact, he went on to the bitter end, didn't he? Najdorf, he wasn't very happy about what happened. So let's go back to his key position here. Right, so g4 was losing, but we'll just do one other continuation. I mean, I just want to understand this. So I don't have a line for this, but let's say we pushed the pawn g5 check, which looked as like a certainly alternative, but the problem is that the king is going to come marching in, right? So maybe you hold with rook c4, rook behind the pawn. So this is going to be winning in most cases because we have our rook behind the pawn, and that usually pretty big winning chance when you've got the extra pawn on the opposite flank of the main pawn mass, right? So we'll go down the computer line. We're going to be able to drive the rook away. That's our pawn, check. Now we've got to this position again where we're both attacking and defending, and it looks like another pawn drops. Doesn't really matter if we lose G and H pawn and win that. Right, so that's what happened in the game. So G4 loses. What should we do? It's rook E7 or rook E8. Let's just go through one of these lines, rook E8 maybe, and see why this draws. Okay, so presumably we take the D6 pawn off. So yeah, what's the difference here? We slot behind the pawn. And that makes all the difference because now the white rook is active and becomes more active as the pawn advances, and the rook actually gets tied down. Okay, so now the black rook switches across to the front. I think we're going to say this is probably a book draw. That rook e8 or rook e7 allowed the white rook to get behind the c pawn. That was all the difference. Okay, good. I mean, that probably deserves a whole video in itself in terms of interesting and theoretical rook and pawn endgames. Second one I've seen in this little set, so that's really good and good example to look at. As I say, I've done a lot of videos on blunders and people making mistakes and edge cases, which is also the idea of seeing the difference between two moves really can sharpen your idea and concepts of what are the important. Okay, now I've skipped a couple of games I was going to look at, including quite an interesting endgame, but obviously a lot of content. What you should do if you want to look at this tournament in more detail, obviously Chess Games, the PG Mentor has the PGN. You can download it and look at the games and go through the most interesting ones. Now I've jumped forwards to round 18, I believe, and this is included. It doesn't have a big impact on the tournament, but it is a famous game for the position and what happened. So it's Kotov versus Smyslov. You can see it's over here. The Smyslov wins. So Smyslov, I mean, they're not going to catch Boleslavsky anymore. Helped Smyslov get third position, and Kotov ended up outside the qualifying for the next candidates, but he got into 53 Zurich anyway because he qualified through interzonals. You can see that profile of the game that he had a totally dominating position for most of the game, and then basically the idea is he overpressed and they lost in a couple of moves and game over. So let's have a look at this. Really interesting tactics in this position. Maybe if you want to sit down and have a look at it and do that by yourself. So he's still got his advantage here. Something like G3, just keep things solid is the way to go. But queen to e2, he's attracted to the idea of getting even another piece because we've got all these pieces lined up. Maybe you could do an Alekhine's gun or something, or just sacrifice and have the queen ready to jump up. So they're all the sort of things which are obviously spinning through Kotov's head. But black says, give me that pawn, and attacks the bishop. So, what are we going to do? We're going to sack our rook. That's the, not losing yet, but that starts the decline. Knight takes. He should have just bishop d3 is given, just basically settle down. But this move is losing. The tactics are really wild. It's a good example of spending a bit of time looking at the tactics. Queen g8. So Smyslov is very, very cool here. I guess he wasn't quite the mid-50s Smyslov, but still a very strong player. And g3, you should just hold the g file. You're losing already because you're going to lose the bishop either way. But this fork, doesn't it look nice and juicy? Juicy fork. What's black going to do? What do you think black's going to do? Of course, black's going to sack his rook. Check. And 21 winning move. Got to get activity somehow. Check. Got to take it. Check. And then now that supports the queen, which is the killing concept here. I mean, for instance, queen e2 given his best, which can't be good, right? Because then black will mop up. But if you don't do that, bishop c2, anything great, because if you go king f1, mate in 2, king e1, mate in 1. Not much else to do really. So if we look at the key point here, is that Kotov obviously missed this check, which frees up the queen for diving down the g file. That was really fantastic end to that game. Unfortunate for Kotov, of course, but didn't affect the tournament once again. But it sort of, it shows the sort of the pressure and the mistakes people make in these top level tournaments. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. Okay, we moved on to a Stahlberg-Bronstein, round 17, second last round. See, it's not showing up on my chart because once again, I think it wasn't quite of the blunder level, but it's terrible blunder, right? So what you can think of here is that if we add that to the list, we can see that really the run towards the end of the tournament, Bronstein really got the run of the green. Blunder by Smyslov, blunder by Stahlberg, and in the last round, blunder by Keres, which is like 3 extra wins he wouldn't have otherwise got, and therefore just to get up to Boleslavsky, right? So, but Boleslavsky, as he's got that Kotov one earlier, so you can see, but this one, and this final one, right? So, and this is obviously a very important game for the tournament. If this was draw, then it was basically all over, right? So position's kind of even. You can see it's been kind of even, although black has the edge, but and we've got to move 40. Obviously, last time control move, and that's where the blunder was made and game over. I mean, many moves draw in this position, but the best move is f6, just pushing the rook away and then getting a king out of the way. So, and the point about f6 is it sort of stops the threat. I guess is the main thing. The threat is all against the pinned bishop against the king. So f6 followed by king h1, for instance. Okay, what I did was queen to d2. It's quite difficult to understand. Maybe time trouble. Maybe he was looking for this check here to hold on. But now simple move, knight f4. White could resign already. Okay, so the piece is attacked 2 times. As we'll see, there's I've already got that red line there. There's a skewer there, and there's a skewer coming here. So let's have a look at how that happens. Unpins his bishop, and then rook to d7. And the problem is that queen takes g2 check is checkmate. So white will lose his rook, and then end the game. And then you think, okay, well, we could have set ourselves up to defend our bishop a 3rd time. Yeah, but there's a problem with this. The piece is the wrong way around. Lose the queen. So what's the other line I showed there? Could try to there. Also has a big floor. Double up. Check. The rook. Check. Oh, okay, cool. So that may not be the only way of winning, but this is a winning pawn endgame for black. Obviously, he's got the 3 versus 2 on the queen side, and that's what's key. They just do a typical continuation in this position. King g7, activate our king, right? And now that the not a lot that's going to go on here. That pawn's going to go through. Yeah, so that's winning. That's quite interesting. The fact that it transposed to an even pawn endgame, but it was totally winning for black because he had the queenside pawn majority. So remember that in your games. Okay, so that was round 17. So Bronstein is now only half a point between Boleslavsky because of that blunder. And then in the last round, we're now going to look at the next blunder, which helped Bronstein equalize, which is Bronstein-Keres. Okay, there you go. This one's pretty bad by Keres. You can see the game score there. So 27, move 29 actually. Keres blunders, and after being even, game's over very, very quickly. Pretty poor form by Keres. Actually, he didn't do well on this tournament. This is one of his many chances at the World Championship. In the candidates, this probably wasn't his finest hour. So his next move is just a mistake. I mean, he should be playing rook to b8. Rook f to b8 is given as the best move because, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of a threat here. So he has to make sure that he can cover that g7 square if the queen goes in. And then you can imagine the normal tactics where after that you'd bring a rook around and then sack mate on h7. Anyway, so that's kind of I think that's the overall theme to think about in this continuation. Keres plays b3 and take it. So his idea is that his knight's attacked, but he's going to counterattack. Right, so that was sort of his idea. And he sort of softened up the queen side a little bit. He probably thinks pieces coming off. And rook f4, like we said. So mate is coming and unavoidable. So queen h6. Queen c2 is a mistake, technically, but I don't know how you could call that a mistake. Because black resigned here after queen h6. So what we're going to do, the mate is threatened. I mean, we can take the rook with check. Yeah, let's do that. Hide the king. And it's actually saying that the best thing to do is to give up the queen. But anyway, you'd imagine that's the way to defend. But of course it doesn't work because this is actually checkmate. That's where black spent way too long just fussing around on the queen side. And show more thing. And actually, rook g8 is supposed to last a bit longer, but same idea. It's just going to get killed because now it's the threat of rook takes h7 check. And anyway, longest survival is actually discontinuation, which obviously doesn't help very much. So black should have been more concerned about king side than this little foray on the queen side. So anyway, Keres lost that game. And Bronstein got caught up to Boleslavsky. And then we're not done yet because there's a couple of blunders to go over in the playoffs, which are also very instrumental in determining who gets to meet Botvinnik. Just let me load that up. Okay, we're going to look at 2 playoff games. This is the first one, round number 8. Now, the idea was it's a 12-game mini-match, which ended even after 12 games, and then it went into sudden death. I don't know if that means per game or every 2 games, the white and the black, but so it was 6-6, and then in the sudden death, Bronstein won the last game. So we're going to look at that as well. But here is one of the games during the mini-match. And you can see it was quite strange there that, I mean, did it affect the result? Possibly not. But you can see that Boleslavsky gave up all his advantage with one move. And then a couple of moves later, Bronstein gave it all back. So this is quite interesting. The endgame type position, you can see there. I always like these. So let's have a look at the continuation which was played. King f6 throws away all the advantage. Now even, having been +6 beforehand. And then rook g4, that's the right move. So you're controlling this pawn in particular. Okay, knight g6, we block. And then we have to stop that pawn getting through. It's a really neat tactic here. What actually happened in the game, let's have a look, was Bronstein took the knight off. But there's a problem here. The problem isn't there. That diagonal's blocked by the pawn. So even though check, Boleslavsky just blocked the access to the h7 square, and it's all over. So let's go back and have a look at what the correct tactic at this point was. It's drawn now, so it's really, maybe you wouldn't see this over the board. Maybe there's a lot of time trouble. So we have moved our bishop back. White is able to queen with check, but you can see that this is a dangerous pawn, and a mass exchange on g6 is threatened. So white can try various moves. The computer suggests queen h7, take that knight off with check, and yeah, white's not going to win this position. The strong b pawn is the balance. It's a draw. Okay, so that's what Bronstein missed. And they get back to the original position. That king f6 is the problem, which allowed rook g4. If you play king f5, now rook g4 is not as strong. Let's do the same continuation, knight g6. If you take the knight off, you get the same kind of bad continuation, and the rook's being attacked. So you can't do this fancy thing, even if that worked anymore. So rook takes g6, king takes g6, and let's just do this. Let's just see if that does anything. Well, king g4 does win, but right, queen check, bishop e8. Now we just take the rook. And there's the difference in the position. Right. Okay, so that was the 8th playoff game. A bit wild there. Actually, the result was the result which should have been anyway, so you couldn't say that blunder had a big impact, but obviously a big double blunder in there. Actually, we're going to be looking at the last game but one, which Boleslavsky could have won and didn't, and then he lost the next game. Right. So you look at this position. Actually, best continuation for white. You can see all the ups and downs over here. And so Bronstein blundered first. He should have just played a queen d5 check. That's the variation given, king in the corner, check, and basically get a perpetual check. Right, he didn't do that. He wanted to play on, so snap the rook off. Game continuation. There is one problem with that. White is losing. Right, queen, check, king up, not really matter. Queen d1, attacking the rook, and I think also importantly bringing the queen back. Rook g2, all good. g2, it's okay, not the best. Knight to e7, check. Now, this is where queen takes e7. This is game continuation. Game continuation was take the knight, 2 queens, but obviously we're going to have a perpetual check, right? So why did Boleslavsky, he lost his chance for the World Chess Championship right here. what should have he played? I think it should have showed earlier, right? Basically, king f7. I mean, look, if you're not losing and you've got 2 queens, you want to win any way possible. Now, what's white going to do? There's no checks, no sensible checks anyway. So the computer line is rook to d4. Obviously, at least we can threaten to advance our pawn. Just snap it off. So what's the material balance? Looks quite even, but we have another queen. Once again, there's no real useful checks here. Queen d5, check. King to e8. So computer line continues like that. One of many moves. Queen takes e4, check. And the thing is, the king is finding safety. And you got 2 queens. I mean, there's obviously, this is totally lost, right? So this queen takes e7 check here is where Boleslavsky lost his chance. Anyway, that was game first of these sudden death ones. I'm not too sure if they were in pairs, but anyway, that was. And then one more game which Bronstein won. Anyway, that's all my rundown of the 1950 Budapest candidates. A little bit too unsure about how I'm going to go forwards with this. I mean, when I look at, there's a lot of games to go through, and I must say the ones I find most interesting are the ones which have popped out as two very interesting rook and pawn end games where a slight inaccuracy was all the difference between a win and a loss, and obviously the usual sort of middle game tactical blunders by different people, like in this position exactly here. Okay, now next one, Zurich. Zurich's done by many people. So, but at least I've got a book to guide me this time, the Bronstein one, which I have on my shelf over there. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.